shut the live down. So we were supposed to do the bonus segment. So we are back live real quick. Jessica wanted to share some insights. So go ahead and bring that information up and what you have to share with
Okay.
regards to.
So last week I had shared just a quick slide on it was just talking about the different perspectives on Josiah and the Josiah reforms and the Hezekiah reforms. And we had talked about Josiah last week in the Come Follow Me. And then this coming week, we're going to be talking more about Hezekiah. We talked about him both times, but we expounded on him in this one. And I had mentioned how there's some kind of like the long-standing scholarship, if you will, in the academia world has looked at Josiah and Hezekiah's reforms as like basically without flaw or error. There's like no critique of it. And this other scholarship, it critiques it a little bit. And it basically points out that they may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater on some of these reforms. So an example would be Josiah and Hezekiah, both in their efforts to get the idolatry out of Israel, they do away with a few things that may actually have been First Temple period, like legitimate practices. One of the reasons that Hezekiah destroys the brazen serpent, which is the same brazen serpent that Moses had used for the children of Israel to look to in a symbolic way, it represents Jehovah. And so they're supposed to be looking to Jehovah to be healed of the poisonous serpents in the desert, is because the people at the time were so inundated with the ancient Near Eastern cultures around them that they started actually burning incense to the brazen serpent itself as though it were their god. They had lost the meaning of the symbol is the takeaway from that story. And the symbol itself was just completely lost on them, and they were worshiping an object of brass. And in Kings, we talked about how in Second Kings, how the narrator is using like a play on words where it basically reduces the brazen serpent down to the brass symbol that it is. Like it's just like, oh, this is just a piece of brass. This isn't actually God. And so you can see Hezekiah's heart is aligned with the desire to get the people back in alignment with the covenant that they had made with Jehovah anciently. Josiah has the same desire, and he's trying to do the same thing. He's a very young king, though, and in his early years, he becomes a king at like 8 years old, and from like age 8 to 16, it's unclear how much control he has. But at age 16, he does make a statement. They find the book of the law, which a lot of people think is Deuteronomy because that's kind of what we typically refer to as the book of the law. And we don't actually know, by the way, if that is what it is, but it was something akin to that. Even if it wasn't like our version of Deuteronomy, it's something akin to that, but it's the law of Moses. And he realizes that the people are out of alignment, and that's because his father was causing a great apostasy among the people. And so in the middle of all this apostasy, you basically have these two kings who are trying desperately to get the people to turn back to Jehovah. And there are some very wonderful lessons there. So what I wanted to expound on is just what this scholarship is. And then I wanted to point you to a resource that I think is really helpful. So recovering the First Temple world is very important to us as Latter-day Saints because we have found that a lot of apocryphal texts, including the books of Enoch that come way later past Joseph Smith, that they align with a lot of our Latter-day Saint scriptures, like the Doctrine and Covenants and the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price. And so we can see that our gospel as we know it and the rituals as we know them through the process of the restoration that Joseph Smith started, that they seem to be speaking to the First Temple tradition in many ways. Now, on Scripture Central, there is a brand new video by it's on the Heavens Code channel, and I forget the scholar's name who does it. Sorry, I love his videos, so I watch all of them. He did one about this recently where he talks about those symbols and how they had become corrupted, and how Hezekiah and Josiah are trying to do a restoration for the people, but the people, they were so inundated with this ancient Near Eastern worldview and other cultures, because Israel, it's a land that people are walking through. Like, it has a couple of different key points, both on the ocean and through its land, that are allowing trade throughout the ancient Near East. And so they're constantly having to deal with like outside influences. And then in the middle of all the apostasies with all of these kings, they start losing what their religion actually means. They basically don't understand it anymore. And the reason that Margaret Barker's scholarship is really important, and some of this other scholarship that's kind of like a minority view is helpful to us as Latter-day Saints, is because it gives us a little bit of the First Temple worldview. And what she's trying to do is figure out what is different about the First Temple period versus the second. The First Temple, Solomon's temple that he builds, the one that gets destroyed, and then the children of Israel in the southern kingdom, they get exiled to Babylon, which we were just talking about in our Come Follow Me tonight. That temple that was destroyed, when they come back from the exile, they have to rebuild it again. And this is where you get that Second Temple period. A lot of the knowledge that we have is about the Second Temple. Even like archaeology, it knows more about that Second Temple period than it does the First Temple period. But what's interesting about this scholarship is that we're getting some insights into the First Temple period, and it seems to align more with Latter-day Saint beliefs, which means that one of the takeaways we can get, or one of the connections we can make, is that we have a very ancient religion. It's an ancient covenant that was restored. In fact, there's an article, and I'm going to give this as a resource. If you go to your gospel library and you type in Ancient Covenant Restored, and you put in the name of the author as Robert Millett, he's an LDS scholar. He wrote it many, many years ago. It'll explain how the covenant that is restored in the latter days through the prophet Joseph Smith is an ancient covenant. And it is a very, very helpful article. And when you read that perspective, I want to give you a couple of other resources that you can read up on for this understanding of the scholarly debate that's happening out there. There's a risk that we take in overemphasizing certain things, or maybe making everything black and white. Like, for example, I have seen recently on Fair LDS, there was a scholar who he gave a really great presentation where he was basically like, look, while this scholarship is very helpful that we're getting about this First Temple period from scholars like Margaret Barker, she's a Methodist scholar, who are outside of the LDS faith, but they're just looking into this period. While there's a lot of value in that, we want to make sure that we're not minimizing or devaluing the things that we know about Josiah and Hezekiah. Hey, Tim, can you mute so I'm not hearing your keyboard?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
But I have like a keyboard background going on. But what's really interesting is like when you look at her scholarship and you look at some of our beliefs, they align, but there's some Latter-day Saints to this very day, like right now, happening in this online space where they're actually arguing about this. They're maybe overemphasizing the Heavenly Mother ideas. Like, for example, they're thinking that this Asherah is Heavenly Mother. It's actually not. It's actually a Canaanite goddess who was married to Baal. And the reason that we find some interest in it is because we believe in Heavenly Mother. And we can see from the First Temple tradition that there may have actually been this divine feminine, a father, a mother, and a son. And when you look at Margaret Barker's scholarship, she emphasizes this idea that there is a divine feminine, and she's able to kind of draw that out in the work that she does. And so that was a really great connection for us as Latter-day Saints, because we're able to say, hey, look at this older temple period. This is more in line with the temple that we have and our understanding of the heavens and the gods and the divine council, and that it's a family council. And so those are the parallels that you can make. Now, this slide, the purpose of this slide is just to introduce Margaret Barker's project, the reconstruction of a suppressed First Temple worldview that predates the reforms of King Josiah. It establishes a new paradigm in scholarship that the Enoch tradition, long sidelined by mainstream biblical studies, was actually the original liturgy or myth or religious view and liturgical center of the Jerusalem temple that Solomon built. And some important points for Latter-day Saints are the Enoch connection. So Barker's claim that the Enoch tradition is ancient and was basically the taproot of Christianity provides a scholarly parallel for the book of Moses that we have in the Pearl of Great Price, where Enoch is a central priesthood holding figure who establishes a covenant community that literally is taken up into heaven. Another important point for Latter-day Saints would be that there's a high priestly faith that she's identified. So she argues that Jesus did not invent a new religion, but he actually restored the first temple religion in the New Testament time, specifically the order of the high priesthood or the Melchizedek priesthood. And this resonates with the Restoration's focus on the Melchizedek priesthood and its premortal origins. In all of creation, we believe it's through that Melchizedek priesthood order that creation happens. And then another point would be that we see the temple as Eden. So her work identifies the temple as a symbolic representation of Eden and the creation. And that's a concept that is familiar to Latter-day Saints through the endowment ceremony. And then here on this slide, I wanted to highlight how Barker's controversial proposal that the Deuteronomist reforms of King Josiah in 623 BC were not merely a cleansing of paganism, but it was actually a more radical revolution. It was very conservative. It suppressed what she views as an older, legitimate Hebrew faith tradition. And so this is another important point for Latter-day Saints, because we have a doctrine through the Book of Mormon that there were plain and precious things removed from the Hebrew Bible that we have, the King James Bible that we have. And Barker's scholarship provides an external witness, someone outside of our faith. She's, again, a Methodist scholar, to the loss of plain and precious things that are described in 1 Nephi chapter 13. So she suggests that major elements of the original faith of that first temple tradition, such as the divine council, which we talked about earlier in our Come Follow Me presentation, visions of God, like Lehi had, like Moses had, like all prophets have had, and also the Lady Wisdom, which she has drawn a connection between Lady Wisdom and the tree of life, the tree. And in Lehi and Nephi's vision of the tree of life, we see a connection there too. And so did Margaret Barker when she was looking at our faith tradition and our beliefs. Well, she has this view that those were edited out or transformed somehow by this Reformation period under, I guess, starting with Hezekiah and then kind of concluding with Josiah. So there's this idea that she talks about the Josiah riddle. And if you see any of her lectures on the Josiah reforms, you'll understand what I mean. I'm not going to get into that, but you can check out her stuff. Just Google Margaret Barker, type her name into YouTube. There's tons of lectures that she's done, including ones for Latter-day Saints at some of our symposiums. While traditional biblical history views Josiah as a hero, Barker notes that he removed the Asherah, which isn't the goddess Asherah, the Canaanite goddess. She's talking about the Asherah being the stylized tree of life from the Holy of Holies. She believes that this was actually part of the Holy of Holies. There are other scholars who've concluded this too, but it's a minority view if you're going to look at like the totality of the scholarship. It's very new. It's newer scholarship. And it's come through both archaeological as well as linguistic studies. And this provides a really fascinating context for why Lehi, who preached about the tree of life and the Messiah, was hunted by the Jerusalem elites who favored Josiah's new law-based model, which is what the time of Jesus Christ is all about, right? Like they're all about the law of Moses. And they worship the law as though it is their God and it will save them. And they completely miss their Messiah who's right in front of them. So you can see that something happened there. There was a loss of plain and precious truths. There's also another point for Latter-day Saints to note here, which is the missing atonement. So Barker notes that the Day of Atonement is missing from the festival calendar in Deuteronomy 16, suggesting the reformers minimized the ritual renewal of creation, which is a theme that Lehi and Nephi emphasize in the Book of Mormon. So these are really important points for us that we can take away from her scholarship. Now, Lehi and Nephi and a 600 BC temple world points to ponder on this. So this slide illustrates the convergence between Barker's reconstructed Jerusalem of 600 BC and the cultural and theological world depicted at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. And a few important points for Latter-day Saints on this would be ancient wisdom symbolism. So Barker has stated that Lehi's vision of the tree of life with white fruit contains ancient wisdom symbolism. And she sees that as being very intact in our Book of Mormon text, and almost certainly as it was known in the 600 BCE period. So it really validates the Book of Mormon as an ancient text from that time period, and the story of Lehi being truly from that time and place where the Book of Mormon claims they came from. She identifies the tree and its mother-son imagery as a preservation of the very traditions the Deuteronomists were trying to purge as they were trying to reform and kind of push everybody back towards this more of like a monotheistic, we just need to worship Jehovah. They basically don't want to have all of that drama that they had with the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom and the disunity and the divided kingdom to carry on. It's like they're trying to like reform and kind of push everybody into this centralized worship and tunnel vision. And in the process, they may have actually lost some plain and precious truths. And that's what the Book of Mormon says happened. Well, things like the divine council. Lehi's opening vision of God on a throne surrounded by concourses of angels matches the Merkava throne mysticism. Barker identifies as the heart of the First Temple religion, which the reformers had replaced with a focus on a formless voice, like God without form. And we also see Nephi as the wise man. Her research suggests Nephi, like the connection we can make is that Nephi would represent kind of what she views as that older wisdom tradition, which included things like shipbuilding, also metallurgy. So he's making things of metal, making tools, and then he's building ships. And also dream interpretation, which we see in the Book of Mormon quite a bit, rather than that law-only model of his brothers, which Laman and Lemuel were all about. They seem to be aligning with the Deuteronomist reforms of their time in 600 BCE. So these are all really important points for Latter-day Saints to pull out of that scholarship. So why Barker's scholarship matters to Latter-day Saints, this is kind of like a synthesis of that, but it's basically that she's generated a lot of intense interest from our scholarly community because she's moving beyond, I guess, the kind of like the tunnel vision of that monotheistic view that so much scholarship in kind of like the mainstream realm is constantly propping up, and she's kind of like going back in time and trying to identify what those differences are. And so we see, I don't know, I guess moving beyond proof to the idea that there is a paradigm compatibility happening here. So again, some important points to ponder for Latter-day Saints. There's a second witness, okay? Barker's work acts as a second witness. Like, look at 2 Nephi 11:3, okay? And this shows how there are many anomalous Latter-day Saint doctrines, like a mother in heaven, a plurality of gods in council, and an eternal covenant that are deeply rooted in the more ancient Hebrew religion of the First Temple tradition. Also, Christ in the Old Testament, we can totally see him there with our worldview and our religious belief. Her research recovers Israel's second God. So Yahweh is recovered as the son of Elyon through her research. And this provides a historical basis for the Book of Mormon's claim that the pre-exilic prophets clearly understood the Messiah's divine identity and role. However, the post-exilic period seems to start to move away from that. And by the time you get to the New Testament, there are many truths, many plain and precious truths that are lost. And then, you know, we'll talk about the great apostasy when we get to the New Testament. But all of these things, it's the same thing that's happening. We're losing the divine family, the divine council. We're losing all of it. And mainstream Christianity has lost that too. And that's why her research can be very interesting and compelling for Latter-day Saints. Now, there's also this idea of restoring the fullness. So she identifies a tradition in which Jesus received his fullness and high priestly status at his baptism, which aligns perfectly with the revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 93, verses 12 through 19. We have an understanding that Jesus did not receive of the fullness at first, but through all of these things that he did, including his baptism, he received of the fullness of his Father after completing his mission. So ultimately, Barker's scholarship invites us to put the temple back at the center of our lens when we're reading the scriptures. It should be the lens that we have on all the time when we're reading the scriptures, turning the Old Testament from this like book of shadows into an actual witness of the restoration. And so I think that's the thing that, I don't know, to me is just the most important thing. And okay, just make sure I got all of this here. I did cover all of this, right? Yes.
You did.
Okay. All right. So the other thing that I want to show you guys, let me close this
while
one.
you're doing that, let me kind of plug in here real quick. I'm going to remove my background because it's better for me to do that because it is funky when I have the background. So here is the two books that introduced me to the Divine Council. Margaret Barker, the very first book I've read, and I want to get the rest of her books because they're really good. So this one is called The Great Angel, a study of Israel's second God by Margaret Barker. So I will drop the link into our main discussion as well as in this bonus segment where you can purchase this through my Amazon affiliate. But this is a great resource with what Jessica's talking about, with what we talk about when it comes to the Divine Council. The reason why I bring this up is because when I was outside of the LDS Church, this is the first book I found and got a hold of and read through. The second book is this one, The Triumph of Elohim, From Yahwehisms to Judaism. And it is edited by Diana Vikander Edelman. And basically, it's just essays of the discoveries of the Ugaritic text. What a lot of people don't understand is that we have the discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Everybody's talked about that. Even to this day, we still talk about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a lot of scholarship that has validated the reality of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But what people don't understand, part of that before the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually discovered, the Ugaritic texts were discovered. The reason the importance of the Ugaritic texts is that when they started translating and understanding these texts, it started off with just mundane, everyday living stuff. They started finding that there was parallel versions between the Canaanites' belief system and First Temple Israelite religious belief systems. Mark S. Smith is really good. The Biblical Origins of Monotheism. I have another book on my shelf with The God Against the Gods. So there's a lot of scholarship that goes in. So when we say that we rest on biblical scholarship, this is what we're talking about when it comes to divine counsel. So our critics, you want to argue, you argue against biblical scholarship. You argue against Margaret Barker. You argue against Mark S. Smith. You argue against the late Dr. Michael Heiser. You want to contend and say that the divine counsel is not biblical. You're going up against established, respected, peer-reviewed biblical scholarship. And so I encourage you to get a hold of these books because they're going to change the way you approach the Old Testament, as well as also approaching how Christ saw himself and the first century believers understood what Christ revealed and brought into the first century, Second Temple Judaism. So you want to share this right here?
Yeah. So what I wanted to show you guys, along with those books, and you can look at a lot of things by Margaret Barker if you don't have time to read a book. There are several LDS lectures that she's done. And again, if you just type in Margaret Barker LDS, it'll probably pull up, or like put Sperry Symposium or Interpreter, it'll come up. And one of the articles that's really helpful, you can find on Interpreter Foundation. I pull a lot of their articles. I love the work that they do. Them and Scripture Central and BYU Research, they have all kinds of wonderful articles, but it's more than you could ever read in a lifetime.
Right.
But one of the ones, this is a 2-part article. So it's titled 20 Years After Paradigms Regained, Part 1, The Ongoing Plain and Precious Significance of Margaret Barker Scholarship for Latter-day Saint Studies. And I'll just read the abstract. It says, 20 years ago, the Foundation for Ancient Research of Mormon Studies published Paradigms Regained, a survey of Margaret Barker's scholarship and its significance for Mormon studies as its second Farms Occasional paper. The first part of this essay provides an overview of Dr. Barker's scholarship and its wider reception through early 2022, and then includes a broad survey of Latter-day Saint interaction with her work to the present. Part 2 of this essay, forthcoming, will address specific criticisms and appreciations of Barker's work. They have Part 2, 20 Years After Paradigms Regained, Part 2, responding to Margaret Barker's critics and why her work should matter to Latter-day Saints. And here, the author addresses, it says, specific criticisms of Margaret Barker's work. He says, first, I set the stage by discussing Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions as a Map and Compass for Navigating This Kind of Controversy. I show how his observations cast light on debates about Jesus in the Gospel of John, which in turn resemble present debates. In this context, I then consider some notable criticisms of Barker's work as not mainstream and consider an instructive appreciation of Barker by Father John McDade in his Life of Jesus Research. I then respond in detail to a recent BYU Studies essay that was critical of Barker's work. So there is a scholarly debate that's happening among Latter-day Saints. Like, some people are just like, no, you shouldn't like look at her stuff. And others are like, no, this is great. There's some great things. And that's why I wanted to do just like a follow-up, because again, what I had mentioned in our Come Follow Me earlier tonight in our full live stream, for the lesson this week was that there's something that's always stood out to me that Joseph Smith said. He talked about the principle of moderation and moderation in all things. And I really believe that this is an important principle. I think it's true of scholarship too. I think that you can go one way or another way. You can say, well, I only like this person's scholarship and I don't like that person's. I am the kind of person who's like, give me all of it and let me decide what I want to take from it. I really like Abraham Gileadi's scholarship, and he doesn't really like Margaret Barker's scholarship. I've talked with him about this. He's not a fan of hers. And I do like her scholarship. So I can like Abraham's work and I can like Margaret's work, and I can find things that I love about both of them and appreciate in both of them. And I find truths in both of them. And it doesn't mean that I'm like, because I do another podcast with the Isaiah Institute, which is Abraham Gileadi's his foundation, and I really do love his literary message of Isaiah. I think it's just phenomenal. I think that he identifies a structure there that is amazing. There are some things that I am not as sure about, and I keep it a more open mind on. But one thing that I do see is the structure that he has identified. I can see it. It's there. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So what I'm trying to say is you can like and appreciate all kinds of scholarship and find what you need. Like Michael Heiser, sure, there's some great things. There's a lot of weird stuff that I don't agree with all that he's done. So you just kind of have to have your temple lens on, right? And
Right.
you measure the scholarship against the words, the collective witness over time of the living prophets, okay? The collective witness over time, because even the prophets' opinions differ, even their interpretations differ. And it really depends on their day and their time and what they're dealing with for the church and the world. And just try to remember this is an ongoing restoration, and we have 3 great ways that we can kind of like hone in on truth. One is our personal witness from the Spirit, another is the scriptures themselves, another is the words of the living prophets collectively over time. And when you
Right.
put all those things together, then you can start looking at more of these esoteric sources like scholarship. And you cannot get lost in the scholarship. You'll be able to have a really great foundation and measuring stick for how to identify truth. And I don't I try not to turn down what I think is good scholarship. I try to draw from it what I find to be helpful, and I find this scholarship to be helpful.
Right.
But I wouldn't go so far as to say that Hezekiah was bad or that Josiah was bad. I would not say that.
Right.
There are some Latter-day Saints who are saying that. There was recently a Fair LDS article that addressed this. In fact, they even did a video on it featuring it. I would encourage people to watch it. I didn't pull that one up. I would have to Google that one. In fact, let me see if I can find it. I'll show it to you guys because I
Right.
think it gives a balanced approach
Right.
to
While
this
you're doing
whole
that, I
thing.
wanna make mention, for those who are not familiar with, uh, Foundation for Apologetic Research, FARMS, is now actually known as Maxwell Institute. So FARMS used to be the old school when online LDS apologetics was playing catch up, because you've got Fair, who recently changed their name within the last couple years to Faithful Answers and Informed Responses. Used to be Foundational Apologetic something research, but all these started because of the old school chat rooms, AOL chat rooms, and the online criticisms that people were running into. And so you have Jeff Lindsay, you have Daniel Peterson, you have these old G's, the people I came into studying and learning about this when I came back into the church. And so I just want to let people aware that FARMS is now Maxwell Institute. It is part of BYU. It used to be FARMS. So that's why when you read some things and it mentions FARMS, that's who they're mentioning. But now everything is under Maxwell Institute, just so people are aware of that. But yeah, I did see the one that I did not watch it. With regards to what I did see it come up on my feed on my YouTube channel. Uh,
Okay, I found it. It's right here. Here, let me
okay,
just show you guys really quick. This one is also really good. And if you read those two interpreter articles that talks about Margaret Barker's work, you'll kind of gain an understanding of what is so significant about it that people are talking about. And then this one is the other one. It's by Alan Hansen. That's what his name was. And he has a video on YouTube that you can watch too. It's on the Fair LDS channel. And he goes through and he basically says, look, if this scholarship is great, we have things that we can pull from it, but he tries to kind of bring people back to that moderation zone where he is kind of cautioning people against trying to put everything in black and white terms and saying, well, Hezekiah is bad and Josiah is bad, because that's not true. And in fact, Isaiah uses Hezekiah as a type for the end time. He's like a proxy savior, and he is an example of an end time servant. So, and that's using Gileadi's framework. So I'm going to talk about that when we get to Isaiah. But you guys can also check out my Isaiah Institute collaboration. It's just a little playlist on my channel, and I'm going to be interviewing and talking with other people who have just volunteered for the Isaiah Institute and how they've utilized the tools there to help supplement their studies. I do the same thing, okay? I use it too. There are some people who are so prejudiced against Abraham Gileadi and like all of his stuff that they will get angry if you talk about him or if you talk about his perspective, because he has this idea about an end time servant, and he doesn't see that as Joseph Smith. Okay, he sees Isaiah as literally like an end time scenario, like probably the last few years or 7-ish years leading up to the second coming. That's how he views it. And he views it as like a cyclical pattern. And so I will explain all that when we get to Isaiah, because I think there is really great scholarship out there that can just give you a lens that will align with your temple lens. And this scholarship by Margaret Barker, I see it that way too. I feel like, okay, there's some stuff in here that totally aligns with our temple view.
right,
And so it's great, but you don't want to take it so far, because remember that she is an external scholar outside of our faith.
right,
And Abraham, he's really just looking at Isaiah, okay? He's not looking at, like the book of Revelation and Isaiah, or you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
his focus was Isaiah. And so you just have to kind of understand the scholarly perspective that you're reading and where they're coming from, so that
right,
you can kind of figure out, okay, what can I take from this? What is valuable here for me? And one of the things that Alan Hansen does in his paper is he tries to point out what is valuable in that scholarship, but then what the mistake is for those who are taking it too far. So far that they're trying to say, they're basically painting Josiah like a caricature, like he's some kind of
right,
evil reformer who he's just a bad villain, and we've just had this skewed view of him. And this is happening in Latter-day Saint discussions online, and
yeah.
so even in
I
videos that you see on
right.
YouTube, and it's not really true. It's just not true. And so he points this out, and so you guys can check this out. This is on
I
fairlatterdaysaint, and
I
it's
I
Alan
think
Hansen defending Josiah.
right. So here's my thought on the whole Josiah reform and Deuteronomist reform. It did
Okay.
happen. There is scholarship that shows that it happened. But I think Josiah's intention was to bring back true Israelite worship. Did he do it the right way? Probably not. But he centralized worship in Jerusalem. I think the problem that I see when I've come and studied this, both outside of the church and then coming back into the faith, coming back to church, is that when you look at this in the broader historical perspective, it wasn't really Josiah did what he did because he discovered the book of the law and says we need to get back to the law. We need to get back to the covenantal identity of who we are as a people. We need to get back to the temple worship that we enjoyed doing. I think it wasn't until years later that we see this happening. And I believe it may be the interim between Josiah and what we just talked about this evening with the prophets and kings, Jehoshaphat, Asa, Uzziah, Hezekiah, and then those prophets. That I think that time period of apostasy, I think that's when much of the Deuteronomist reform took place, because they actually wanted to bring the the law, bring what they had, we could say scripture today, looking back into the past, that they changed it to fit their cultural perspective in relationship to what they held to be. So that's where I see the redaction happening, where they're like, no, we need to be a monotheistic religion, and this divine council doesn't make sense anymore. So we just need to hold to the one true God. So we can't blame. Yes, we cannot blame all Deuteronomist reforms on Josiah, which took place over a century of scribal editing. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Thank you. That's what I was attempting to say.
Yeah, good job, Thomas. He's always got good comments. He's so wise. I pinned one of his comments earlier. So, yeah, like, look, I really liked this in this article where he talks about how we need to understand Josiah in his context. Now, another thing to remember about Josiah, you guys, is he was only the king for 30 years. He was a kid. And, like, by anyone's standards, he was young. He dies in his, like, 40s, mid 40s.
Mm-hmm.
He was very, very young. And remember how he goes to the prophetess Huldah? And there's some discrepancies that people have. Like, I'll admit that one of the things that I was kind of sadly disappointed about by Fair LDS, because I like Fair LDS, but I saw
Right.
this video where one of the people who teaches the Come Follow Me, it's almost like she was afraid to just say it, just say that a woman can be a prophet, okay? It's like she was afraid to say it. And I'm not afraid to say it. I feel like this is what Margaret Barker has done. She's given us the ability to see that we have priesthood power too. And
Right.
I think that another one that I really love is Barbara Morgan Gardner. Okay. I met her once and she hugged me. Like, she has this like amazing presence and she has this really strong personality. She's not by the world's definition of feminist, but in the church, I have seen people call her a feminist. And it saddens me because she's totally not like that. She's just somebody who she loves and adores the living prophets. She talks about them all the time and she
Right.
sustains them. But she wrote a book called The Priesthood Power of Women. And some people have a problem with that. And I think that the way I
So
feel
I have
about
a
it,
question. I have a burning question.
okay, hold on, hold your thought. But
Okay.
I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate, okay, and this is what I like in Margaret Barker's work and I like in Barbara Morgan Gardner's work, is I'm starting to see something that I think President Nelson was trying to get us to see. Back when he very first became the prophet, and this was like right at the start of the pandemic in like 2019-ish. It was in that October conference that I believe he gave this invitation where he asked us as women to study the Oath and Covenant of the Priesthood, so the priesthood chapters, and specifically section 25 of Doctrine and Covenants, which is the blessing that was given to Emma Smith, and she is ordained to expound scripture. Now, I saw this whole thing on the Church History Matters podcast, which I think is helpful, but it really downplayed that word ordained. It basically put it in this context of, the time, and they're like, oh, it doesn't mean the same thing as, like a man being ordained to the priesthood. Okay, well, obviously it doesn't mean the same thing, but they were trying to make it seem like she wasn't ordained to a certain role and priesthood authority. I personally would disagree with that. Okay. That's my opinion. And the reason that I would disagree with it is because I have been taking a linguistic class with Jared Lambert. He's very progressive, by the way, like super progressive. And he is all about trying to get to the bottom of what this feminine priesthood power or priestess power is,
Right.
because he feels like he's like, look, for us men, we have a whole structure. We've got, hundreds and thousands of years of what
Yeah.
priesthood leaders do, but women don't. Like, there's just no women in the scripture. There's no female angels. There's no heavenly mother appearing to Joseph Smith. And it's like, there's none of that. And so he's trying to kind of sort that out. And he's using his skills as a diachronistic linguist to be able to do that. And I really enjoyed his class and his perspectives. I don't know if I would take all of my opinions quite as far as he takes some of his, but I still value that type of learning. And the reason why is because I am a woman. I have these questions. Okay. I do. I have those questions. I want to understand. And what I like about this Fair LDS kind of gives like a counterpoint to those who take that scholarship by Margaret Barker to an extreme, where now they're trying to say, well, Josiah was bad and Hezekiah was bad. Look, two things can be true at the same time. Josiah can be good, Hezekiah can be good, and they could also have possibly contributed to the loss of plain and precious truths, but they would have done it innocently. Okay?
Right.
They wouldn't have done it like intentionally trying to create a problem. They would have been doing it to try to correct, and you could say maybe overcorrect the course that their people were on. And that's more how I see it, trying to regulate my thinking and put it in a moderation zone, a
Right.
moderate zone. And I think that this Fair LDS article will do that. It'll kind of explain that and help people with that. I wouldn't take it so far the way that some people have, because it's hard to say for sure.
Right.
We don't really have all the answers, and this is an ongoing restoration. And
It
so
is.
I just want to be a proponent of scholarship. I love scholarship, you guys. I love it. I bring it into every single Come Follow Me that we do. And I
Right.
also love the living prophets. I sustain them. I love them. I think they have the most amazing insights, but I also see them as having a certain role. And I don't think that their role is to delve into deep scholarship. I think that they leave that to the scholars. I think their role is to do what I think the priesthood role is, which is they protect the ordinances and
Right.
the way in which we come into this covenant. They're kind of like the protectors of that, the
Right.
fathers, if you will. And I feel like the church has slowly been trying to restore what that divine feminine is. And I think that even with the young women's themes, I'll admit that when they came
It's still
out,
awkward to me.
I was like, "What the?" And also, I'll admit that, like, they've changed us, like, 4 times, okay? Like, in the
Yeah.
last 100 years. It's like every 25 years, you get a new something, and even in the last, like, 20 years, we've had, like,
Yeah.
3 young women's themes. So, I have a hard time with, like, all of that, but what I do see happening and what I am grateful for is that I see people trying. They are trying to understand, where do
Right.
women fit in to this order? What is
Right.
our role eternally? Like, are we barefoot and pregnant in heaven forever, or what? Like, they're trying to get those answers, and I think that that's the real beauty of it, because, it's like God created man and woman, right? You see it right there, the pattern established in
Right.
Eden. And he created man and woman after them. And again, that word is plural. It's not a singular God. So
Right.
it's like all of these truths, you can find this in Margaret Barker's scholarship, and you can find it in other external LDS scholars who are going down that same vein. They're doing this usually through diacritistic linguistic studies. So that's where they're trying to study the change in the language over time. Like, for example, like, the Hebrew Bible was created mostly after that exile to Babylon, okay?
Right.
And it was compiled, like the Bible that we have, that was mostly created after that time. But the
Right.
teachings existed orally. The language itself, the Hebrew language itself, was oral before it was written. And these people, they'll track the oral tradition and the first writings and how the language evolves over time. And then they'll compare it with other languages around that
It
whole
Right.
entire ancient world. And they'll find, what they'll do is they'll basically find everything that matches. And it's like, okay, well, let's say 7 out of 10 have an Adam and Eve story that say that it was a temple in Eden, and a few of them say garden. It's actually the Hebrews who put in the word garden. The Persian one seems to keep the true meaning, which is that it was a temple. And in Latter-day Saint belief, we believe it was a temple. So
Right.
it's just,
In
it's
fact, I
like
saw
all of this
somewhere
scholarship
that it
aligns with
yeah.
what we have.
Yeah. And I saw somewhere where they say that it was actually the Garden of Eden was a temple upon a hill, on a mountain.
Yeah,
That was actually on a
exactly.
mountain.
There's actually
Um,
an interpreter article all about that too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing about scholarship, I just kind of want to plug in here is that as Latter-day Saints, it's not that we use scholarship and say that the scholarships that we reference, like the late Dr. Michael Heiser, Margaret Barker, Mark S. Smith, and all the others that have come before and done a lot of extensive study, who've actually went to school, earned their degrees, earned their reputation of this study of the divine council of First Temple Judaism, and done all this research. We're not saying that they are confirming to what Latter Day Saints believe. What we're
Mhm.
saying is that we are looking at the scholarship, and it shows that based on the prevailing scholarship of Old Testament understanding of First Temple Judaism, we see these patterns and symbolisms having been restored in these last days
Mhm.
by God through Christ, through the prophet Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
That these are not just first century Christian ideas, these are much more ancient ideas, theology, and doctrines and forms of worship that have been prevailing and lost over time because of the destruction of the first temple and the apostasy and spiritual rebellion, and then the restoration of Israel that we get into the second temple era, that goes from, starts with Cyrus, and then the second temple era starts with Cyrus, and it brings us all the way up into the New Testament to 70 AD, where the second destruction of Jerusalem and the completion and fulfillment of the diaspora of the Jewish age ended. Second Temple era ended with the Roman Jewish War of 66 AD to 73 AD, with the destruction of the city and the temple thereof in 70 AD, which is attested to by Tacitus, which is attested to by by Josephus, the Jewish wars, by every historical account, even the early church fathers. We see it in Second Nephi chapter 25, where Nephi describes the destruction of the of and the Babylonian captivity, and then he goes on and prophesies of the coming Messiah and the apostles, and then upon the crucifixion of Christ and his mortal ministry, that Jerusalem and the temple is going to be destroyed a second time, and that starts the apostasy uh, of the actual general apostasy, not just apostasy of Israel and the Jewish people, the ending of the Jewish age, but the apostasy of the first century church that needed to be restored again through Joseph Smith. And so we see all of this evident, pointing back through history, the annals of history, confirming every aspect of what Latter-day Saint doctrine is and teaches, because our covenants are not first century. Our covenants are are a lot more ancient than first
Yeah.
century.
I want to point out this too. So Jared Lambert did 2 articles. One was called Face to Face, and it talks about Adam and Eve and the face to face and kind of like that divine feminine
Right.
order. This one is about the Elohim. He's an expert linguist. You guys, he has 8 degrees. Okay. He knows 8 languages. He's like PhD plus 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 plus. And he's very, very well versed in this. And one of the things that he points out is how this word Elohim, it actually reflects the theology. So anciently, before the language was written, it was oral, and the way that they would remember the theology is actually through the language itself. This is why there's songs. This is why Miriam uses the timbrels and has songs, and why they're singing songs that we just talked about in our last Come Follow Me that we discussed earlier tonight with Jehoshaphat, and how the people go out with the songs before the army. It's because there's theology and gospel doctrine that is recorded within the language itself and within the songs. And it was like poetry. The women in the temple would sing songs. One of the reasons that you can surmise that they go to Huldah is not just that she was a well-known prophetess. It was also because she seemed to play a role in the temple. Like, she seemed to understand the liturgy, and so they go to her. Now, one of the things I was disappointed about, actually, in the article that I just showed you a second ago on Feral DS, is they kind of downplayed Huldah's role. If you talk to one of these linguistic scholars like Jared Lambert, though, he'll upplay her role, and he'll basically say, no, they were going to her because she did have a recognized authority, and she was somebody that they knew would understand the liturgy, because that was her role. That was also Deborah's role in Judges and Miriam's role in Exodus. And so you see that these women all play this role. Well, what's interesting is in section 25 of the Doctrine and Covenants, that is also Emma Smith's role, is to expound scripture and to put together the hymns that record the gospel doctrine and teach the principles of the gospel. So I don't think that anything's changed. It's like God is really restoring this ancient order. And if you're a Latter-day Saint, there's so much scholarship right now that is just, it's on the precipice, I think, of really exploding. Right now it's relatively minor in terms of the larger realm of scholarship, but it is just so cutting edge and amazing, the ideas that they have and how they're able to prove it and show it from the scriptures. One of the ways that this is done is through the language itself. So in this article by Jared Lambert, this is on Public Square. It's called Elohim. What was it? Elohim, the Divine Echo, what the word Elohim still remembers. So he talks about what the word Elohim still remembers. And he breaks it up into its parts. L-O, which is O-H, Eem. And he explains it does mean gods, literally. That is what it means. And it is talking about this divine council. And who is the divine council? It is a father, a mother, and their children. The L is the father, the O is the mother, the Eem is the children. And he shows this through various languages. Right here, here's a little table where you can see this. Again, he is an expert linguistic scholar. He speaks like multiple languages. I think it's like 8 languages or 6 languages, somewhere in there. And he has like 8 degrees. I mean, this guy is like, this is his realm. This is his area. And trust me, all those people on TikTok and all those little naysayers out there, they do not know more than this guy knows, okay? They do not understand the language of the scriptures more than this guy does. So whoever's out there like, oh, there's no Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, they don't know what they're talking about. They show their ignorance when they say that.
Paul refers to these types of people, individuals who are ever learning yet never coming to understanding the truth.
Ever learning and never coming to a knowledge of the truth is what he says. And that is true. That is a sign of the times, guys. It's a sign of the times. So here is a little table here, and you see how he breaks down the El, generic God, Eloah, singular form for God, and this is in the Hebrew, the biblical Hebrew, and then you have Elohim, literally gods, and it also is used, so the singular would be Elim, and the plural, Elim, sorry, is the singular of, or the El is the singular, the Elim is plural of El. So when you have Elohim, this is where you see the father, the mother, and the children. So in Nephi's and Lehi's vision of the tree of life, you see him seeing the vision of the father who is pointing to the tree, and the mother and the son, right? And so there's kind of like this progression. Well, this speaks to that earlier First Temple tradition, and Margaret Barker's scholarship totally hits on this and will explain it. And it'll help you understand that in that First Temple tradition, there were 2 trees at the front. In Solomon's temple, there's 2 pillars, 2 trees. They have like fruit and stuff, like pomegranates and things at the top. And if you go to Scripture Central, the Heavens Code video that they just put out, I think like a day or 2 ago, it might have even been today, they talk about this. And you guys can watch it. It's a beautiful video. It's very short. He explains in the video just some of that symbolism that has withstood the test of time. Well, the language has also withstood the test of time. So if you look at the Ugaritic, which is the Canaanite language, and then he's got the Phoenician, the biblical Aramaic, the Akkadian, which is that East Semitic, and the Arabic, and he's got them all comparing to the Hebrew. And this is what they do. They look at it in this way where they're looking cross cultures and cross time. And when they do that, then they get a better understanding of what the ancient understanding was for the people in the ancient Near East. And this, for us as Latter-day Saints, is so familiar, right? Because we know that we have a father and a mother and a son, and there's the Holy Ghost as well, that there's a council of
The
gods.
divine council with the
And what we
divine
come to
parent.
understand is that God is actually a species. We are gods in embryo, we've been told by our prophets. The
Right.
reason that they use that analogy of embryo, or the metaphor of an embryo, and us being gods in embryo, is because we have that same potential, because we are the same kind. And in Genesis, it emphasizes the kind so much. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it's a beautiful understanding that we have. I honestly feel sad for people who don't have this. I do. I feel sad
Or
for
a lack of understanding, as we're seeing in the comment section in the chat.
yeah, some of those comments are, and that's fine. You know what? If you want to live your life completely ignorant of this, I
Yeah.
have no problem with that. Like, that's totally fine with me. I could care less. It's like, do what you want, live how you want. I have no problem with that. But I personally, like, this is one of those truths that I see in the Bible. I see
Mhm.
it. It's so abundantly clear that this is a thing. And when you start diving into the linguistics, you really see it. And you're like, holy
Yeah.
moly, like Joseph Smith was spot on. And the Sermon in the Grove and the King Follett discourse, super important, because they
Mhm.
teach this too. They teach this
Right.
too. And even though those have not been canonized, the ideas are part of our doctrine. And
Right.
I think that you see that in the Family Proclamation. And so I
There's
don't know
one thing
why
I want
those
to point out,
weren't
though,
canonized.
too.
I wish they were.
And I'm
Huh?
glad that we're doing this as a second bonus live instead of actually doing it at the end,
Yeah, I would
because
have got too long.
it got too long. So, um, I want to point something out, because since you mentioned this, I went back and looked at all my notes and all my studies with regards to this, because I'm like, okay, are you sure, Jessica? Are you positive that you're saying this correctly? You know, and so here's where my thoughts land, because when we look at the term Elohim as it is used in scripture and prevailing biblical commentary, it is either used in a uh, plurality of majesty, which, yes, that is correct. Um, but notice that when you go to like Mark S. Smith or Margaret Barker, or the prevailing biblical scholarships with regards to the divine council, the heavenly father, the divine parents, the heavenly mother, the first temple Judaism, they always refer to Elyon
Uh-huh.
as singular. Elyon, the Most High. Yahweh, his, one numbered among the sons of God, where, Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, that when the Most High, Elyon, divided the nations according to the number, divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God per the Ugaritic text and Septuagint, Yahweh's portion was Israel. Yahweh's inheritance is Israel. We've already go back in our study of the plagues of Egypt, was Yahweh's incomparability and power against the gods and goddesses of Egypt. Those 10 plagues have gods and goddesses attached to them. And Jessica is always right unless it's a typo. And so today people misunderstand that Elohim also uses Ben Elohim, the Ben Elohim. We see that in Psalms 82. The Ben Elohim who is present in the divine council. The Ben Elohim in Job 1 and 2, when the sons of God came and presented themselves. Satan also came among them. The divine council. Satan coming among these people, numbered among the sons of God. Yet there is no wickedness that can stand before the presence of God. But we have Job saying, in the divine council, you have Satan, the most evil biblical character there is, presenting himself before the very throne of God. It throws modern Christian understanding for a loop-de-loop, and they can't rationalize, because they don't want to admit to prevailing biblical scholarship that they're in error, and they're not
Well,
wanting to come in alignment with what the prevailing scholarship is showing us.
Well, I don't even know if I would call it prevailing, because I think there is a real debate that's happening. But what I would say is that when you look at the evidence of
Right.
all of what these people are showing, this is another example, this table that I have up here. is another example. When you look at the linguistics and you're looking at not just the Hebrew, okay, because the Hebrews actually messed up their own doctrine in their own
Right. They
language.
collapse and flatten a lot of the stuff into more of a binary understanding.
They did, and a lot of it, you see this in like the midrash and stuff later, where it's like this flattening of God is happening, and they really have messed up their language, okay? And you see it when you start comparing it over time, like how it's evolved over time. And that's what this linguistic scholarship is showing. So it'll compare all of these different regions. So here you have the Ugaritic, the Baal cycle. They have El and Asherah, and this depicts the council of gods with El and his consort, his wife. You'll hear Margaret Barker talk a lot about El and his consort and Yahweh and his consort, and he'll talk about how El's consort became Yahweh's consort during all of this apostasy that was going on in the northern and southern kingdom that we've been talking
And that's
about.
where we see them starting to flatten everything, where they're combining Yahweh into El, Elyon, Elohim,
Right.
and the consort of Elyon becomes the consort of Yahweh. And so, yeah, you have that disagreement and that conflict within the scholarship
But
with regards to
there are hints, and you just noted several of those hints that like no matter how hard they try to write this out of their text, they miss all kinds of places. They miss it.
Right.
And it's recorded not just in the text, but in the language itself, in the sounds, the oral sounds. And that's what the linguistic scholars are showing. So here you have all of these comparisons across cultures, and you have so here's that Baal and Anat, which is the Asherah that went with Baal. And this is what I mean by like Asherah is not Heavenly Mother, okay? What it's showing is that these other cultures, they maintained an older tradition as the Israelites started losing their tradition, and they didn't seem to understand that their God was Yahweh, okay? And Yahweh is the Son of God, and the Son is their intercessor. He's their mediary or mediator. And it's like they start losing this along the way. Well, that's what Joseph Smith restores with the restoration, and then what the Book of Mormon puts back in place for us, what the Doctrine and Covenants expands on. And so this idea that Elohim is some like triune God, this is not a thing. This comes way later, hundreds of years after the New Testament. And older, even the language itself is recording this old tradition. So here's examples that he gives of scriptural examples, like Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. You see the remnant of this older theology where they didn't write it out. Genesis 1, 26-27, Genesis 3:20, Proverbs 8:22-31, Psalm 45, 6-7, Hosea 2:16-20, and Jeremiah 44:17-19. Okay. And these are sources for this. These are a bunch of different biblical scholars who have done work on this to try to understand what was going on there. And this is what they found, is that there is an ancient first temple tradition that is recording all of this. And by the second temple period, they start to lose it. And by the time of Jesus Christ, they've lost it completely. So he goes through and he does a restoration. He restores that higher temple order. We as Latter-day Saints are able to see that because we have it. People who don't have it, they don't see it. They literally think that Jesus came and started some whole brand new thing and was like, oh, that's the old law. Here's the new law. No, that is not what he did. He basically fulfilled the old law, validated it, and then expanded on it. Because remember, the children of Israel were invited anciently to come up the mountain with Moses, but they didn't. They stayed at the base of the mountain. We talked about that in our Come Follow Me that we did on Moses. Well, the importance of that is that they were invited to receive the fullness. They did not receive it. They were given something lesser. God met them where they were. He accommodated them in their weakness. And that's what he always does. He accommodates us in our weakness. He's an accommodating God. And even in the restoration, you see him accommodating us in our weakness. when our prophets don't understand correctly, God still works with them, and over time he corrects them. And he weeds out the things that aren't quite right and that they didn't quite get, or that they weren't understanding, or that is no longer needed because it served a purpose. It's like there's all these times where it's like God is just, he's trying to get us up the mountain, and it's a journey. Okay, it's not like a straight shot. It's like you're climbing, you're going up and over and weaving through trees, and it's a journey. It's lots of little things, but the path is straight and narrow, and the Lord clears the way as you ascend the mountain. It's like he keeps clearing that little path for you. And anyway, this scholarship, you guys, is awesome. Like, if you guys check it out, just look at some of these things that I've shown, look at some of these scholars, you'll see why we have an amazing church, an
Right.
amazing gospel, an amazing theology. It surpasses anything else out there.
Right.
And we have this understanding of God. It's like, how can you really commune with a God that you don't understand or that you don't know? You can't. It's hard. Okay? There's a barrier there. But when you start to see, like, especially as a woman, it's like when you start to see that you're also a child of God and you're also made in the divine image, but the divine image isn't some genderless like cloud floating in the sky. It's a man and a woman together. And that's what Jared Lambert does in his face to face article. He points out how how there's a man and a woman in Eden. This is clearly like theology happening here, like helping us understand the divine. And it's in the linguistics. And there, that God is not one, it is all of those who are in unity, specifically a male and a female working together, a father and a mother
Yeah.
working together for the salvation and exaltation of
Yeah.
their children. And Jesus Christ, he is the one who was sinless. He's the perfect lamb, and he is our intercessor, our intermediary, who can do for us what we would fail to do for ourselves, because
He
he's
is the advocate. He is the mediator. He stands between
yes.
the throne of heaven. That is the reason why the temple veil was rent. People misunderstand that episode. They think that because the temple veil was rent, we no longer need that that's the end of it. But no, what they miss is that Christ entered the holy of holies, the heavenly holy of holies, and he stands as an advocate before the Father on our behalf. And so
Mhm.
when we understand that he is the great high priest, he is functioning as the advocate, as the one who presents himself as a sacrifice. He presents and saying, "Forgive them, for they have received me and received the blessings of the atonement.
Yeah.
And look upon them and see that my righteousness is upon them, that they are clothed in my righteousness." And that righteousness come by way of covenants. And those covenants we make at baptism, those covenants we make in the temple, those covenants we wear as a reminder in relationship to keeping and walking that covenantal path of righteousness.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's all I had to share. I just wanted to give you guys a little
Right.
bit more resources on what I was talking about last week, and just give you some places that you can go if you want to look into that yourself. And I am still feeling sick, and I'm starting to lose my voice. My throat is hurting really, really bad, and I feel like my medicine's starting to wear off. So
Okay.
I'm gonna go now because it's like midnight here.
We
I
didn't
hope you
we
guys got something out of that. Let me know in the
right,
comments, and
right.
if you want links
So
to anything, I can try to put it in the comments later, maybe tomorrow.
right. Yeah, if we can get those links and get them in the description for this bonus segment. I'm glad we actually did this separate from the
Yeah,
conformity
wait, I could put
discussion.
them in it later or like
So,
whatever, whatever. I'll just put it as comments or something or in the description.
all
But
right.
yeah, you guys can go look them up. You can Google those too. They're
Yeah,
easy to find, and yeah, hopefully
yeah.
that was worth
So we
it.
appreciate you for those who asked for the bonus section. Definitely scan the QR code up there. I got to get my fingers trained to point to the right direction. So that QR code accesses the that so that way we do this every week, and pray for Jessica.
Yeah,
We are believing that your throat is being healed this moment.
I've been sick for like
your healing is
3
already
weeks.
there.
I don't know what it was, but it was like it's been hurting to swallow over like about 2.5 weeks. It starts when my throat started hurting, but I'm just like, man, I cannot kick this, whatever it is. But thanks, guys, and I hope that was helpful. And have a good night, a good Sunday,
Be
good
blessed.
week.
Be blessed.